The RX 9060 XT 16GB was probably one of the best cards that came out last year. It came with 16GB of VRAM, it was decently priced at $350, and it was a solid performer. However, in 2026, it's not actually the budget card nowadays because of the RAM apocalypse. GPU pricing has increased, and the RX 9060 XT 16GB is now $450. So, if you're building a PC and you're still wanting a graphics card that has more than 8 GB of VRAM, capable but is a budget king, your next alternative might be the Intel B580. Now this one has 12 GB of VRAM. It does come with a higher bus width compared to the RX 9060 XT. Let's see if this Intel B580 is a good alternative for you. We're gonna run this in multiple games. We're gonna run it at 1080p, 1440p, and 4K at realistic settings, and we'll find out if that $150 difference between both of these guys is actually worth it. Our first game is Arc Raiders, and look at that one, boys. The RX 9060 XT is definitely a better card here compared to our B580. Although both of these guys still has high FPS for this slower paced game. Let's move on to Cyberpunk 2077, and this one is at ultra settings. And look at this one, boys. The RX 9060 does have the higher FPS compared to the P580. However, look at the frame time charts, right? There are a lot of micro stutters with our RX 9060. Let's see how this one performs later on when we go up the resolution. Next game is Oblivion Remastered. Now, we do have stutters in this game, and that's just with the game, but both of these cards perform well, although the RX 9060 XT is slightly better. The lows, however, go to our B580. Let's move up to like massive multiplayer games now, and we have Battlefield 6, and look at that one, boys. RX 9060 XT is just superior here compared to our B580. 160 plus FPS compared to about 130 FPS. That's a big difference. Another multiplayer shooter is Delta Force, and the lead of the RX 9060 XT is actually not that high compared to the B580 on the walking benchmark. When we move on to our firing benchmark, bang! The RX 9060 XT is definitely showing the B580. It's definitely the superior card. PUBG is a slower paced game, and on the DX11 game, at 1080p competitive settings, we're actually getting decent FPS between these two cards, although the lead of the RX 9060 XT is only about 15% better compared to the B580. Let's move on to competitive games now, and here we have Fortnite and performance mode, and look at that one, boys. Our B580 is definitely better here in terms of the lows, and lows are very critical in these type of games. And next up is Valorant, another competitive multiplayer shooter, and the Intel P580 is clearly the better card here, much more stable compared to our AMD card. So if you're playing Fortnite or Valorant, the B580 might be a better choice for you, but we'll see if this one is still the same when we go to 1440p. Moving on to our hero shooters, and here we have Apex Legends, and on our firing benchmark, the RX 9060 XT is slightly better here compared to our B580. When we go to our static benchmark, not so much, but still slightly better compared to the B580. Marvel Rivals is a different scenario. The RX 9060 XT is definitely the superior card here compared to the B580. It does have really low 0.1% lows. However, that's because when we load this benchmark, there's just that spike at the start. Now in Helldivers 2, the RX 9060 XT is once again showing its dominance over the B580. It's about like 30% or 40% better on our running benchmark or our stratagem benchmark. The same thing with Path of Exile 2. Look at that one, right? 30% better compared to our B580. We added World of Tanks in here because this game has a different engine, and I want to see how the B580 performs in a DX11 game. And RX 9060 XT is slightly better here compared to our Arc P580. Let's move on to 1440p. Now, Arc Raiders, we've got upscaling in here. XCSS for the Intel card and FSR4 for the AMD card. And look at that one, boys. The lead of the RX 9060 XT is not as high compared to when we are at 1080p. When we go to Cyberpunk 2077, wow. Look at that one. The Intel B580 is clearly the better CAD here compared to our RX 9060 XT. Who knows, the bus width may come to play here, and this is why we're getting better results with our Intel CAD. And Oblivion Remastered, the RX 9060 XT is much better here compared to our B580, 40% better. That's a huge lead. And you can see on the B580, it's just stuttering, right? There are just micro stutters in there, and it's just not stable. Battlefield 6 now, and we've got upscalers in here for both cards, and the lead of the RX 9060 XT is not actually that high compared to the B580. And Delta Force, we also got upscalers in here, and on the walking benchmark, the RX 9060 XT is about 20% better. When we go to the firing benchmark, it's the same thing, right? The RX 9060 XT is just better here. And at PUBG 1440p, the lead of the RX 9060 XT is not that high, only about 14% compared to our B580. Although for both cats in here, they're still getting really high FPS. That's 190 and 218. Now, we're going back to our competitive games, and we've got Fortnite in here, performance mode, and look at that one, boys. The B580 still has better lows compared to our RX 9060 XT. When we go to Valorant, and it's the same thing, right? The B580 definitely has better lows here, and even the average FPS compared to our RX 9060 XT. In Apex Legends, the RX 9060 XT has better average FPS compared to our B580, but the lows are more or less the same on our firing benchmark. On our static benchmark, the RX 9060 XT leads on average FPS, but the B580 does have slightly better lows. Marvel Rivals once again, and we've got upscalers in here, and the RX 9060 XT's lead is lower here compared to our 1080p test, but it's still better compared to our B580. And Helldivers 2, we're still getting that huge lead for our RX 9060 XT. Not as high compared to 1080p testings, but it's still better compared to the B580. And Path of Exile 2, the Intel card is definitely not good in here. The AMD card is just dominating here. And once again, we've got World of Tanks in here, and the RX 9060 XT still maintains that slim lead over our B580. Okay, here we have 4K testings. Now we do have upscalers here for our Arc Raider test, but we did put our quality settings to performance. And the B580 is slightly better here compared to our RX 9060 XT, and that could be because of the bus width. When we go to Cyberpunk 2077, look at the status of our RX 9060 XT. Now we do have performance settings here for the upscalers for both cards, and you will definitely have a better experience with our B580 compared to our RX 9060 XT. And PUBG DX11 Enhanced, that's the API that we're using. The RX 9060 XT is the winner here, and I think this is the only time that it had a clear win at 4K. At World of Tanks, the RX 9060 XT does have better average FPS, but look at the lows, man, and look at the micro status. That's really bad. I have a 4K monitor, and I do play 4K with some of our slower paced games like PUBG and World of Tanks in here, and even Arc Raiders, but I do tone down the settings. If you want to do that, you can see that the Intel B580 is clearly the better option here. If we round up everything at 1080p, the RX 9060 XT is about 20% better in terms of average FPS, 10% better in terms of the lows, and about 14% better in terms of the 0.1% lows. However, the caveat in here is that on competitive titles like Fortnite and Valorant, the Intel B580 is clearly the better card. Here you do get better stability with our B580 in this scenario. When we move to 1440p, the RX 9060 XT's lead in terms of average FPS is down to about 17% better. In terms of the 1% lows, it's about 12% better, and the 0.1% lows will get 11% better compared to the B580. Once again, on competitive titles like Fortnite and Valorant, you do get better stability and performance with our Intel B580. I don't know, man. I don't know. I can't justify $150 for that performance with our RX 9060 XT 16GB. Don't get me wrong, I love that card, but for that price gap, I'm leaning towards the Intel B580 as a good option. Now, At 4K, though, we only have like a few games in here, but you can see that the Intel B580 is better compared to our RX 9060 XT. The only time our RX 9060 XT is better is when playing PUBG. So the Intel B580 definitely is a good option now. Now, we did have some issues with this card when I tested it last year. However, I'm glad to say that the issue that we had with Paddleback L2 is gone. Right, I can now use XCSAs without any issues now. I didn't actually see any issues with our B580 when I tested it this time around, and it did have like a firmware update when I installed the graphics driver, which is a good thing. And in terms of the price range, right, $300 or $350, one of the things that you might be considering is the used market. Now, we do have like the RTX 3070 or the RTX 5060. Now, I've tested both of those cards recently, so if you want to see how that one performs, if you're okay with 8GB VRAM, I'd suggest you click this video right here, just that one, click it.